What is cancer, and what is this history of the war on cancer? The mention of the C word instills fear, feeling like a death sentence to many people, and understandably so, given that we all have seen the grim outcomes associated with conventional treatments, and those who've been labeled with this disease. It can often be a long and painful journey for many people. You must act quickly and with wisdom and understanding of what the body is actually doing here. When you act out of fear and misunderstanding of the body itself, the results are often disastrous.
The same kind of concentrated effort that split the atom and took man to the moon should be turned toward conquering this dread disease.
President Nixon signed into law today the bill committing more than $1.5 billion to a war on cancer.
But it was only a few years before the questions began.
The American Cancer Society has responded to recent criticism that the federally funded war against cancer has been wasteful and ineffective.
There is little tangible to show for the money that has been spent.
Did the war on cancer promise too much too soon? And more than 40 years later, where has the progress against cancer really been made?
It's been 53 years since this war on cancer was declared by the government. And what do we have to show for it? The nation was promised a cure in 5 years, and they put billions and billions of dollars into new cancer research. Well, has it paid off? And by the way, we were always told that it was President Nixon's war on cancer, that he sort of spearheaded this. But in fact, it was actually his original plan to cut the budget for research. Instead, it was other influencers, such as a prominent socialite, Mary Lasker, who really moved the needle with cancer research. She went from socialite to a pioneer of national policy making. She teamed up with policymakers and bankers and developed the framework of the National Cancer Act, which then President Nixon endorsed by the end of that year.
She began a media campaign to convince Congress and the public that with the right commitment, cancer could be cured, and that the time was now.
But I found this interesting because it reminds me of what I see today with social media influencers and Hollywood types pushing forward medical policy and impacting public opinion and public acceptance of something maybe the government agencies want. It's clear that using these influencers have been shown to be more productive to acceptance than if a politician or marketing figure were to go out and talk about these things. Now, Mary Lasker had a simple warning, and she told the public, if you think research is expensive, try disease. But what if the billions of dollars that have come from the pockets of Americans to do all this research has really been fueling the entirely wrong premise and led us down an unproductive path? Hi guys, if you are enjoying this video, please hit that subscribe button so we can get this information out to more and more people who need it. Also, if you can, click that little bell icon so you are notified every time we have a release of a new episode. In 2024, over 611,000 deaths from cancer are projected for the US alone. That's more than 1,600 deaths attributed to cancer each day. And in the coming year, we're expected to hit a bleak milestone. The first time new cancer cases in the US are expected to cross the 2 million mark. In fact, more young people are being diagnosed with cancers. It's the second leading cause of death for children. For decades, most of this cancer research has been focused on the genetic model of cancer, this idea that your genes dictate if you get this deadly disease. In 1976, a couple of doctors claimed to find that normal genes can mutate into genes that cause cancer. For their supposedly groundbreaking contribution to the genetic origins of cancer, they went on to win the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1989. They insisted that if they could find the one genetic mutation responsible, they could cure cancer. It was and is still being claimed that cancer is a genetic disease. However, as time has marched on, that single mutation they were looking for turned into, well, multiple mutations with various expressions in different cancers and in different people. And in fact, the more research focused on genes, the more convoluted it became, and not much usefulness seem to come to fruition in this research. Researchers found that there were genetic variability in different cells in the same individual tumor, and many genetic differences in people with the same cancers. They call this genetic heterogeneity. Now, in reality, the genetic model hasn't been terribly successful as they thought it would be. Yet this is the predominant framework that almost all cancer research and treatment is built upon. A paper authored by 2 medical doctors and professors from Tufts University School of Medicine highlights our current predicament very well in regards to being so far down the wrong path. They write, for decades, the management of clinical cancers has been based on the premises of the mutation theory. That, in short, meant to kill the allegedly immortalized mutated cancer cells. This approach ignores evidence that the carcinogenic process is reversible, as repeatedly proven both experimentally and clinically. Regardless of these damning conclusions, the genetic model and its variants have maintained in academic circles, in the hospital ward, in big pharma, and equally important, in the study sections of funding agencies in which short and long-term trends in cancer research are decided. They go on to say, for the sake of the current and future credibility in the fields of biology at large and in cancer particular, a rigorous, critical assessment of the odd situation biologists and cancer researchers are facing is in order. The empirical evidence collected after more than a century of intensive research indicates that the reductionist genetic model should be abandoned and replaced by a different theory. Now let's talk a little bit about the conventional story and the conventional treatments. We are taught that cancer is abnormal or uncontrolled cellular growth that destroys the body's tissues based on mutations in our DNA. What if any so-called genetic changes, if they do happen, are merely the result of something and not the cause of any condition? If you do even some basic research, you will find that chemotherapy, for the most part, is ineffective in curing most cancers. Epithelial solid tumor cancers, which of course are most cancer diagnoses. Ideally, the decision though in favor of doing the treatment or against doing this kind of treatment should be influenced only by 2 very important questions. First question, does the treatment prolong survival significantly? Second, does it contribute to the patient's quality of life? When an oncologist says that a particular cancer has been shown to respond to a drug or treatment, what that usually means is that the drug has been shown to shrink tumors. However, it's well documented in the literature that tumor shrinkage does not equal longer survival. In fact, it can even mean shorter survival time if the treatment is too toxic, which it often is.
We still lose in this country 40,000 women a year. Now that is not success, that is not real progress.
In cancer research, all patients receive standard treatment first and foremost. Very few people are being studied without any conventional treatment at all. They claim they can't do that ethically, and they can't randomize patients to a no treatment arm because there's established effective treatment in existence. Now, how can we ever know sincerely if chemotherapy is truly superior than doing no conventional treatment at all or a placebo only? We really can't. And it's ironic to me that many practitioners of this cancer model claim that they are evidence-based, yet their evidence isn't even in line with gold standards of determining if a specific kind of treatment is better than the natural course of the disease itself or against a true placebo. They will always claim that it's unethical to do these studies, and I can understand why they think so many times, because some of these doctors are really well-meaning and they really strongly believe that these treatments are the best that they have to offer. Yet that's just a begging the question fallacy, and there is no place for those types of fallacies in scientific exploration. Believe it or not, it's hard to find papers that show the natural course of various cancers, meaning what happens to patients who say have breast cancer and they just do nothing at all. They take no treatments at all. I found only one paper that sort of does this for breast cancer. It's a 1960 study in the BMJ. They looked at the course of breast cancer when left completely alone. Granted, these are very old reports, the only ones I could find, because in today's studies, almost everyone, like I said, gets treated with surgery, chemo, or radiation, or combination of them, and it's just considered unethical to not do so. So I found it interesting in this study that there is a section in their paper, quote, long survivors, and it says, the most striking fact that emerges from a study on untreated breast cancer is the number of patients who survive for 5 or 10 or more years with no specific treatment. All published series on this subject contain instances of prolonged survival, and this must be taken into account. Now, I am not suggesting do not do anything if you have tumors growing in you, if you have cancer, to just not do anything at all. Absolutely not. When the body speaks, we should listen, and we should listen long before these end stage phases even occur. But I think it's valid to question what is really going on with this process that we call cancer, and I've become very curious about the vast variability between people and outcomes based on what kinds of treatments they get or don't get. Now, these older studies seem to have a more honest bend to them. Today, our cancer studies are highly influenced, just as this paper points out that very fact. They write, contemporary oncology randomized controlled trials now largely measure surrogate endpoints, meaning not survival, and are almost exclusively funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So in other words, almost all studies are funded by pharmaceutical companies, and they are looking at endpoints that don't necessarily lead to better survival. This will make the drug or treatment look more effective than it really is. Another whirlwind study came out with an independent review of randomized trials evaluating chemo and the 5-year survival rate in Americans and Australians for 22 major malignancies. This was for all stages of cancer. They found that the overall contribution of curative and adjuvant cytotoxic chemotherapy to 5-year survival in adults was estimated to be 2.3% in Australia and 2.1% in the US. Now, I want to be fair here. There are some critics to this paper, of course, because it was just groundbreaking when this came out. The writers over at the Science-Based Medicine website claimed that this Australian study was custom designed to minimize the apparent utility of chemotherapy. In addition, another critic, Associate Professor Boyer, claimed that chemotherapy is more effective than the study claimed. He said it's more like 5 or 6%, not the 2% claimed in the study. Now let's pause here for a second. Can we acknowledge that if the best defense of chemotherapy is that it's helpful for 5 or 6% of cancer patients rather than the 2% shown in the original study, I think we may be pretty off target. Or the other critique is that the chemo does work in a few cancers, just not the ones examined in the study I just referenced. But again, let's be fair. The cancers that chemo apparently works for is just around 10% of all cancer diagnosis. Surely it is high time to rethink its widespread use. Also, that's not to say anything about what this treatment does to a person's quality of life. What I'm saying here is that chemotherapy for the majority of cancers is less effective than the public is being led to believe if you ask anybody on the street. What's more is that there is very, very little research being done on other modes of recovery. It's just not done. We can't make the claim that if other therapies worked, we would already have a mountain of evidence of them working, when in reality, those studies just flat out aren't being done. Research is an attempt to understand things a little bit better. It never reaches some endpoint of static facts. This process of understanding along the way can be full of errors and wrong models. Sometimes we have to completely change our entire understanding once we realize what we were doing was wrong, inaccurate, or harmful, which we've done many times in the course of history. Now, what about the alternative story of cancer, the holistic story? I was taught, even in my holistic training, that cancer is a failure of the body's innate defenses, and that we need to kill it or destroy it, but we just need to do so naturally. And then I was taught that the genes load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. As you can see here, it's more war analogies fighting with the body. And in my opinion, none of this is really correct. The language is still pointing us in the wrong direction. In a paper titled, "Should We Continue to Fight the Enemy Within?" they outline that our war-filled language isn't helping us. They write, like warfare, the primary focus in cancer therapy has been and still is on how to more efficiently kill as many undesired cells as possible. Despite all the very expensive and toxic radical weapons we use, the enemies are not totally destroyed. This causes collateral damage with unnecessary toxicities in normal cells and reduces the patient's quality of life. So in conclusion, our medical system is built on some fundamental misunderstandings, in my opinion, especially in the realm of cancer. That you are a victim to your genetics, you are a victim to chance, that the body cannot self-heal, and that you can't play much of a role in that process of self-healing at all. In my opinion, cancer is the body's natural response to overwhelming toxicity and suppressed and stagnated elimination from the cell to the tissue to the whole body. The hopeful news is that oftentimes that end stage process can be unwound, reversed, and vitality can be restored. So stay tuned for the next video where I will be discussing how this can be better approached.